This video looks at changes we'll make to how we handle photos on Gwulo. So here's the current page we use to add a photo to the site, and it's looked pretty much the same since 2014 when I last upgraded the website. But since then, we've added around 20,000 photos to Gwulo, and a couple of weaknesses have become clear. First off then is the way that we handle dates. So we type in a date as a year, and then a hyphen, then a month, and then a hyphen, then a day. And that's very much a sort of computer formatted date, but a bit clunky for people to type in. So it'd be nice if we can make that a bit easier. A bigger problem though is we don't record what we know about that date, because in most cases we don't know the exact date the old photo was taken. If we just know it was taken sometime in 1963, we've got an informal rule that we type the date like this. Or perhaps we're not sure about the year, but we know which decade it was taken in, sometime in the 1960s. Again, we say, okay, type 1960-01-01. The problem, of course, is that when someone comes and looks at this date later, especially if they're not very familiar with the site, they don't know what it means. They don't know if the contributor meant to say this is a picture taken on the 1st of January 1960, or sometime in 1960, but I don't know when, or I don't even know which year, but sometime in the 1960s. So not ideal. Well, some people get around this by skipping the date altogether, and then they say, look, I know it was sometime in the 60s, so I'll just put it into the gallery with all the other 1960s photos. And that sounds good in theory, but when I want to show you a list of all the pictures we have from the 1960s, it doesn't work, because now we've got the information spread, some of it in the gallery here and some of it in the date here. This then is the new interface. And now we're recording exactly what the contributor knows. So when was this photo taken? And if you don't know, then choose unknown. But if you do know, you can just tell us quickly what level you know. So if it's a decade, you can come and choose from a list of decades. Or if it's a year, then just type in the year. Or if you know the actual date, then you can come down here and there's a little calendar to make it a bit easier to select the date here. Now this obviously is a little bit of extra information we're asking the user to enter, and I'm always wary of that. Anytime we make things, we add a little bit of work for the user, there's the risk of they just consider it too hard and they don't continue and upload their pictures. But this hopefully is quick and simple enough that people will follow through and use this. The benefit then is that when we look at photos on the site, we'll have a clear idea exactly of what the date is. So whether the date was unknown, whether we know to the decade, the 1950s here, whether we know to the year 1952, and there's the option to say, well, this is a guess, it's approximate, or whether we know the date to more detail. So 24th of September, we think it was 1952. Now also behind the scenes, if you're entering a year or a date, we're still recording the decade. And that means that when it comes time for me to show you a list of all the photos, that's much easier to do. So this is a list of all the photos in Gwulo taken in the 1960s. Of course, that includes photos taken in 1960, 1961, 62, so anything with a year in that range. But also if we go to the very last page, it also includes photos with a decade of the 1960s. While we're here, also worth noting just how many pictures we've got. So there's 10 pictures a page, about 1,800. And a little surprise while I was working on this, the big winner is actually the 1950s. If we come to the last page there, we've got over 4,300 of them. Back to the new site again, and a couple of other changes. If a file name doesn't have any spaces in it, we're going to assume that this is some automatic text. Let me take you back to the older version for a moment to show you what I mean. So here we are. This is a typical file name given out by a camera. And on the current site, we fill that into the title here. And the idea was that if it's helpful, you can use it. And if it's not helpful, like this case, you would come and edit it and type in a more descriptive name. But quite often users don't quite catch that. And in many cases, they come down and type the description in here instead. And the result of that is that the title is no good and the tag isn't much good either. So I've been trying to think of a better way to do that. So what I've decided is that if the file name doesn't have any spaces, we're going to leave the name field blank. So you do have to come in and type something before you can save it. But if you're someone that's carefully named all of your files, we will make use of that. We're not going to throw that information away. So if we have something with with spaces in, I'm going to assume that's a description. Of course, you can still come here and tidy it up, and then you could save it there. And a couple of other little tricks you can say. While I've been looking through so many of these files, these image files, quite a lot of users will put a year or perhaps a decade at the front. So if that's the case, we will make use of that as well. You can see 1960s Victoria Harbour, it's automatically set to the decade. If I choose one with a year at the front of the name, it's going to do the same, extract the date, set it to be taken on that year. So just a few little things to speed up our, the frequent jobs that we do on the website. Now, as part of the upgrade, I've had to move all of the current dates over from the old system to the new system. And what I've decided there is that if we have a year that ends in a 0 and it's 1st of January, that's going to be saved as decade. I'm going to assume you meant it was taken sometime in the 1960s. If we see a year and then 1st of January, I'm going to assume that you meant taken sometime in 1964. And any other combination of month and day, then I'll assume that you know the exact date, and that's how we'll show it on the new site. This cannot be perfect, of course. So there are going to be some cases, I guess this is most common, where you entered this thinking it was taken sometime in 1960, the year, and I'm going to incorrectly change that to be the decade. So it'll just be something to watch out for, and hopefully we can correct it as we see it. This then is the last of the major changes that need new code to be written. Next jobs for me are to work on the layout of the page and adding menus just to get at least a basic site that we can use and access all of the main features. Once that's finished, then it'll be time to run through an upgrade again. So I'll make a copy of the current website as it is today and just check I haven't broken anything. And after that's done, we should be able to try a real upgrade, and then we can open it up for public access and see what bugs you can find. I'm sure there'll be plenty. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. If you made it this far, I'll keep you updated on progress via the newsletter.